Today on Inspired Money.
Even about this time last year, I was working with a group, and there were 12 of us in the hotel conference room. It's the typical meeting. We've wallpapered the walls with white flip chart paper, and we've really thought about their brand in a new and different way. They've had lightning bolt moments. Wow, this is really terrific. And it's like, now we have to go back Monday morning. We have to get back to our jobs. We have to go to all the same meetings we went to before. How are we going to be different?
This is episode 146 with marketer, author, and brand innovator, Mark Stinson.
Welcome to Inspired Money. My name is Andy Wong, a managing partner at Runnymede Capital Management. Each week, we bring you an interesting person to help you get inspired, shift your perspectives on money, and achieve incredible things. From making it to giving it away, Inspired Money means making a difference, creating something bigger than oneself, and maybe, just maybe, making the world a better place. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, Inspired Moneymaker, welcome back. If this is your first time here, welcome. Today we're talking branding. When we define branding, we're talking about everything that contributes to the perception and reputation of a product or service. Our guest is Mark Stinson. He has a branding consultancy company called Bioscience Bridge, and his work includes branding, advertising, and marketing strategy for health, science, and technology products. He's a recipient of the Brand Leadership Award from the Asia Brand Congress for global marketing efforts. He was included in the PharmaVoice 100 Most Inspiring People in the Life Sciences Industry. In this episode, you'll learn the power of branding for either a big corporation, personal brand, or for small business, Mark's customer chemistry framework, and responding to a crisis as a brand. Now let's get inspired with Mark Stinson. Mark, welcome to Inspired Money. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Oh, it's great. Thanks, Andy. Good to be here with you.
Let's jump right in. What's your earliest childhood memory of money?
There's two, because I don't know sequentially which they were, but one, I had a garage art show to raise money for, I think, the Jerry Lewis telethon, right? Could we collect the money? How much could we charge for our artwork, so to speak? But there was a lot of money changing hands, and I thought, this is a really cool thing. But I guess on the other hand, I also remember my parents having real knockdown, drag-out fights over the balance on the Sears credit card. Their balance was probably $200, but it was like, this is not a positive money memory. So these things get indelibly, inserted into the brain and come back at the most interesting times. That's such a great question.
How is it that you got into marketing and branding? From your initial memory story, I hear that you were creative. You were doing art as a child.
My first job was a radio DJ, but then I was told, the people who make money are the people who write and produce the commercials, not the people that read them. And I thought, well, that's an interesting angle. So I got a job at an ad agency, and that's basically what I did the rest of my career. Increasingly creative roles and consulting roles and strategic roles. But basically the idea of developing brands has been my livelihood. And I think getting into that was a mindset of, if people can come up with a great product, that's one thing. But if really nobody knows about it, they can't communicate it, it doesn't stand out amongst competitors, then they really don't get the advantage they deserve. So that's really how I got into the business.
Yes, I've heard it said that it's better to have the B product with the A sales and marketing versus the reverse.
Yeah, there's plenty, and everybody says, oh, if you can be first to market, first mover advantage. We've all heard these kind of terms, right? But there are so many examples in the annals of branding where the second product to market, was able to build on the learnings and mistakes of the first one and really overtake them. I don't know how many people are listening to this on their MySpace account right now, but, I think that would be one example for that we could learn from.
Right. Or they always say that Betamax was technically better than VHS, but VHS took off.
That's right. And in my world, I work with medical products, pharmaceuticals, prescription drugs and devices and so forth. There's plenty of examples of how the innovator product, the people who invented the category or invented the medicine, are not the leading brand. For example, in cholesterol, everybody knows the name Lipitor. Lipitor was not even maybe the fourth or fifth or sixth, cholesterol lowering drug, but they just built a better brand.
Talking about brands, you've worked with global healthcare companies. I saw Abbott, Baxter, Merck, Pfizer. You've worked with biotech companies like Amgen, Gilead, and even you've worked with startups. How is it that you ended up in this niche? Because marketing and branding could be any product or service, but you ended up in healthcare specifically.
Well, I think there's two things. There's the skill or the knowledge. Once you learn these markets, there is some, as in any industry, there's some idiosyncrasies of these different markets. And so to learn the nomenclature of the market, to learn the dynamics of the market. So in healthcare, there's a certain way of working and a certain way of communicating. And so I developed that niche. Now, on the other hand, there's also the emotional connection. I would just much rather be working with something that can help someone or cure a disease or make life better for somebody than working on the bacon double cheeseburger someplace, or the next macaroni and cheese brand.
You want to lower our cholesterol, not raise it.
Yeah. It's like, no, my own lifestyle we won't talk about right now, but what's best for the person is what I'd like to focus on. Yes.
When you have that specialty, that expertise, it's got to be a little bit more challenging because you need to really explain some more complex health, illness, treatment to the layman. Is that a better opportunity for a marketing and branding person? Does that make it more lucrative?
I don't know if lucrative is the word, but it certainly is more challenging and therefore, high risk, high reward perhaps. But I think the principles of when you're trying to talking about communicating to the layperson, you're talking about a patient who is seeking some better health standing. I'm seeking a better health journey. And still the relationship building is the same with that as, for example, the medical sales representatives or medical liaisons who want to connect with the doctors, or the people who want to talk to the insurance companies about getting their products reimbursed, or the surgeons about how to use such and such a device. It's all about interpersonal communication. And there's a lot of fundamentals that are the same. And that's the kind of package of skills I've tried to develop and then even publish those, in my books. And as an author and a model maker, to look at what those communication models are and then replicate them to say these are the best practices, whether you're talking to a patient or whether you're talking to a physician.
Mark, I went to Amazon and looked up your author profile. There were more books there than I could count on the screen. How many books have you written?
I did lose count. I've written 5 books. So let's start there. So the 5 books I've written, are on this branding and creative and models. Then in addition, I've done some journals that are, motivational journals, and they have blank, pages and lines to capture and inspire, people to think and capture those thoughts. And then in addition, so for example, just this week, I published a series of travel journals with some photos. I had a chance to travel to Vietnam a few months ago and took those photos and created some travel journals. So, the breadth of that, and now I just can't help myself. There's a creative juice flowing. So content galore.
What is it that you love about writing and publishing these books?
Well, I think from the standpoint of people that I have enjoyed working with, for example, we have such a great experience in our workshops. And I said, if I can take the content and, bottle it, what makes these workshops or what makes these strategy sessions so powerful and so meaningful? And why do I like them? Why don't I take that content, put it in a book, share it, publish it, tell the stories of how it worked, and then sometimes how it didn't work. And so I've always thought of this as workshops in print, that if these tools, these models, these methods could be captured and shared, then it would be a good experience for more people.
I want to pick your branding and model making brain a little bit. I saw that one of the books that you've written is Forward Fast Branding. And in it, you say branding on a certain level is all about telling a tale, crafting characters and identities, following a storyline. How important is storytelling?
Well, it's infinitely important. And I think over the years, it's become even more important. And people have realized their brand story, about their journey. And sometimes, we think about one type of story as a brand origin story. Where did the Nike shoe come from? And we love to tell the story about how we made it on the waffle iron. Or where did Gatorade come from? Well, there was a coach in Florida who made this formula. So, the how the brands are built is often a great story. But I also look at it as what's the story of the consumer or the user's experience. I was on this path. I came to a fork in the road. This brand came along to help me, to assist me, to be my ally. And then I was able to achieve or perform or, live a different way. So that kind of story is also important. But I think also the story between people. And that's the one I've been working on most recently and just published is customer chemistry. And the story that we tell between each other and how to build those relationships and how to really synthesize. I mean, I look at elements of communication to build that story. But I think to your point, in building the brand and building any business, the story is quite important.
I always hear different things. I think as a business owner, we often feel like we have to tell our origin story. But I hear marketers say that the customer probably doesn't care about the origin story. They want to know what's in it for me. In your view, how do you decide which story to focus on?
Well, I think no matter what, and this gets into this chemistry thing, I use this mnemonic device or this acronym called CHEM, CHEM. And the origin story is really the C part, connect. If you connect with someone, look, even before we started the record of this conversation, it's like, let me get to know you a minute. I want to know, where did you come from? Where are you calling from? A little bit about you. And to ask better questions and to listen is really the beginning of the connection. And so people want to know, where'd you come from? What were your earliest memories of money? What was your first job? Well, I was a paper boy. Oh, well, that's interesting. I was a paper boy too. So we find these commonalities. And that's what stories are a part of. So you don't really decide. You just say, look, at different points in our relationship, there's going to be different stories. As you get to know a future partner, you ask for a first date. You don't ask them to get married on the first date. So, it's like as you go here, different stories might come up.
Okay, so C is for connect. You got to close the loop and tell us what the rest of the letters mean.
As that's what's called a tease, my man. Okay, so C is for connect. H is for honest. And, as easy as that sounds, you say, to be honest. But you have to say, let's talk about challenges. Let's talk about your obstacles. Let's talk about why you're not achieving what you're achieving. So let's have some honest communication. But also, as you can imagine, in the medical, clinical, kind of laboratory science or technology fields, the honesty, it has to be built in. We cannot lie about whether this drug works or not. There's regulatory bodies that want to look at your clinical studies. So there's an honesty built in there too. And then the E is for easy. And can we make this communication easy? You make it easy to read or easy to understand. That's one thing. But you also make it easy to retell, easy to apply. So I always looked at it as, look, people want to know some basic things. What it is, what it does, how to use it, why is it different? So, make it easy when you exchange information. And then the M is for motivate. And how many times have we been taught in sales? It's like, you got to ask for the business. You got to close them. You got to convince them. Well, okay, maybe there was a day where you had to do that and you pound them and, hunker down until you get the business, get the signature. But I always feel like in the success that we've seen is when people motivate to take the next step. You motivate to believe something, you motivate to act, you motivate to, look, we may not agree on everything, but we can move forward, we can concur, we can, compromise. And so to motivate rather than convince is more of a feeling and emotional, and that's really to close the relationship, not just the sale.
Sometimes it's not so concrete. Like, it does require some creativity. You have to do some brainstorming. I imagine that you do things like focus groups in trying to collect the data and do the research in order to identify what is the brand all about and how are you going to craft that story. How important is branding to a company?
If you're not a brand, then you're a generic. So by definition, if you want a company to be different and to be special, to be likable from a potential customer, then it must be a brand. Otherwise you're in a commodity product, you're selling on price, you're going to spiral down. If you're in a brand relationship, you're spiraling up. You're building the brand. That's why they call it that. But to your point as well, it is a designed, brainstormed, focus grouped kind of thing. But I always felt like if you're inventing the brand, that's great. And we'll get in a room and I do a lot of these workshops and it's like, let's figure it out. But if you're also representing the customer, I always feel like the customer knows what the brand ought to be better than you do. And then, of course, people say, but the customer doesn't know what they don't know. Yeah, I get that. But they know their problems. They know their challenges. They know how this fits into their world. They know how this could improve their world. So the customer is always right. And so when I say focus group, customer listening, customer connections, I want to draw the customer into the meeting. And sometimes, for example, a workshop exercise is very much a role playing. Get out of your own skin and represent the customer for a minute, or get out there in the world and do that kind of ethnography. Watch them use your product, talk to them about using your product. I mean, there's lots of so focus group is not just get in a room behind a glass. So let's go into their kitchen and watch them use the refrigerator and see where they put the stuff, or watch them take out the garbage and see what could be improved about that process. So there's a lot of things. There's a company in California I admire a lot, IDEO, and they do this kind of observational research, and it's pretty cool to watch.
In your brand and marketing consultancy, how many campaigns have you been involved with? How many clients have you worked with?
Yeah. Well, you lose count after a while, but you put together this spreadsheet and it came to be about 200 brands, and some of those are very much in a launch, creation, development kind of role. Some of them were fledgling and, let's take them and retool the brand and grow it some more. But there's a lot of lessons learned in 200 brands, which also means there's a lot of companies that you've seen in a lot of different cultures. There's also thousands of people that you've worked with on teams. And so you learn a lot about those relationships too.
What are some of the differences between working with a big pharmaceutical company versus a startup? I'm also curious, what are the commonalities that you see that can really apply to anyone?
Well, the difference is, and you'd be amazed, when you talk about a risk tolerance, you would think, oh, the big companies, they don't want to take a lot of risks. They have a lot to protect. They have to answer to shareholders, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes, they've spread that risk out over hundreds of products in development or in R&D or even products in their current portfolio. So they're spreading the risk out and they're willing to roll the dice sometimes. Whereas a startup says, this is the only chance I have. I got one big idea and so, I need to make it work. And so the comparison and contrast there of the risk. But, what I've found in common, because a lot of the startups are started by people who may have left a large company, or they may have said, I want to stay in this kind of small biotech research-oriented environment, not the big kind of, bureaucratic, environment. And so, the people are what's in common. And so to build the right team, to build the right brand culture, around the product is what a lot of it really is. I would say that's the biggest commonality.
And then personal branding is really big today. Is it similar principles if it's just an individual trying to figure out what is my personal brand?
It would be an overstatement to say it's exactly the same, but I'm going to overstate for a moment. It's exactly the same. Okay. You need to be a likable brand. You need to have your own logo, quote, identity. You need to have a brand quality that somebody says, when I work with this individual, here's what I expect. Boom, boom, boom. Can you get that on a resume in 3 or 4 bullet points? You probably can. What do you expect? What's my quality? Not just that I show up on time, with a positive attitude, but what is the work I deliver? And then, do you have a brand attitude, and what's the work that you're associated with? I think in every field, advertising people or creative people are known for having a portfolio. Here are my photography examples. Here are my sample campaigns or what have you. But I think any professional should have a portfolio. Here's the work that I'm known for. So you have these examples and stories. And then finally, the biggest thing about a brand is the brand experience. We all prefer brands that are easy to work with, easy to buy. They have a good return policy, or at a restaurant, they have great personal service, whatever the case might be. So I ask you as a personal brand, what is your brand experience? How is it to work with you? And probably the biggest lesson learned in my career is that no matter how good you are, if you don't have a good brand experience, you won't get rehired. Hey, it was a lot of great work we did together, but, it just doesn't work out. Well, that's a euphemism for I just don't like working with you.
Coming up, we talk good examples of great brands, branding for small business, branding during crises, all that and more right after this short break. The show notes for this episode can be found at inspiredmoney.fm/146. If you're listening in your car or wherever you are, check the show notes if you want to learn more about Mark or other things mentioned in this episode. It's time for the Runnymede Money Tip of the Week. I hope that you're enjoying today's discussion about branding. Mark said that if you're not working on branding as a business, you're a generic. So if you're a business owner, you'd better spend time and resources on branding. As a consumer, though, you might consider buying generics to save money. And I'm talking a lot more than just prescription drugs. When I say generic brands, I'm also referring to store brands or private label. According to industry statistics, nearly 1 out of every 4 products sold in the US today is the retailer's own brand. In 2018, private label grew by 4.4%. That's 4 times as much as the major national brands. If you shop at Costco, you probably do not need a lot of convincing. In a really well done CNBC report in 2012, CNBC dubbed toilet paper as the crown jewel of Costco. According to the report, Costco sells about 1 billion rolls of toilet paper a year. That's enough toilet paper to wrap around the world 1,200 times. A really good friend of mine used to work for corporate for the grocery store chain Star Market. I remember him telling me that many of Star Market's private label brands were made alongside in the same factory by national brands, so you were not necessarily sacrificing quality. Things have actually changed a lot since the 1990s. Today, Costco, Target, Trader Joe's all have labels manufactured exclusively for them. These private label brands help those stores to boost profit margins while still offering customers affordable prices. This can also help drive traffic to stores and tend to lead to customers buying more because they are affordable. At my house, a lot of the groceries come from Trader Joe's, where about 80% of the products are from its private label, allowing Trader Joe's to buy goods directly from the supplier and cut out intermediaries that can drive up costs from the supply chain. Another really good example of this, going back to Costco, is their $4.99 rotisserie chickens. It's been at that price point since 2009. Now, Costco has gone to pretty far extremes to keep the $4.99 price when rising costs force a lot of competitors to raise prices. Did you know that Costco built its own poultry complex in Nebraska, a farming town near the Iowa border? The complex includes a processing facility, hatchery, and feed mill. This allows Costco to control the production process from farm to store, making key decisions down to the grain chickens eat and the type of eggs hatched. What I'm trying to say is that buying private label and generics are a great opportunity for you to save money, especially in the significant areas of food and medicine. You might make a meaningful impact. So take a look at your spending and look for opportunities where a generic might be substituted for a major brand. That's the Runnymede Money Tip of the Week. Inspired Money is brought to you by Runnymede Capital Management. We help you to plan, invest, and worry less. I want to try something new and feature the Inspired Moneymaker of the Week. This is where we feature a listener of the podcast who has written a review or posted to social media. I want to thank Dave Canyon for taking a screenshot of episode 145 with real estate investor Dan Butler and tweeting this: "The Inspired Money Podcast. I learn, I'm inspired and entertained. Always a great listen." Thank you so much, Dave. Let's show Dave a little love by checking out his podcast, Dumbing It Down with Dave, at davecanyon.com. That's D-A-V-E, Dave, Canyon, K-A-N-Y-A-N.com. If you want to be the next Inspired Moneymaker of the Week, take a screenshot or photo of this podcast right now, share it to social media, and tag me. I'm inspiredmoney.fm on Instagram, or on Twitter, I'm RunnymedeCap. That's RUNNYMEDECAP. That's short for Runnymede Capital. And you can always email me at inspiredmoney.fm/Andy. Do that, and I'll mention you in a future Inspired Money episode. You're listening to Inspired Money. I'm Andy Wong.
I guess as a company, I like Starbucks as an example because they seem to have figured out that it's not really coffee that they're selling. It's not a cup of coffee. They created a Starbucks experience where customers like to go to the location and sit down, and maybe they bring their laptop and do work there. Maybe they're meeting up with a friend or with a business colleague. What are examples that you look to that you like? Who is doing branding well?
Well, the Starbucks is always a good place to start because we do call it the Starbucks experience. There's books written about this, and people can benchmark on that and say, look, for example, we did a whole symposium with companies doing blood donation. So you say, what's the experience of donating blood? And what if it were more like a Starbucks? What if it were more like Ritz-Carlton? What if it was more like going to Disney? What could you learn from these experiential brands to change?
Need a fast pass to give blood.
Right. I'm doing this on my lunch hour. Can we get this on? And I don't want to faint on the way back. So to benchmark these kind of brands is always fun. I think a lot of people will elevate brands or put them on a pedestal and say, these are really great brands. But I like to do workshops where we use almost any brand as an example. And I would say, what kind of car do you drive? And somebody says, well, I drive a Honda, or I drive a Subaru, or I drive a Tesla. And then we compare and contrast those and say, what's the brand, or what's the brand experience? What are they associated with? Or again, we all have these experiences. Well, what hotel did you stay at last night? Well, I stayed at a Hampton. And I stayed at a Marriott. Well, I stayed at a, Hilton Garden Inn. Okay, well, let's compare and contrast. So it's not just about which ones are doing it well that we could learn from, because they all have a good day and a bad day. As good as Starbucks is, they woke up one day and realized, our pastries, our bakery is not up to the standard of what people think about. Now, it's also interesting in COVID-19, I'm starting to get the pastry in the plastic bag. And you realize, oh, it comes in a plastic bag. That's no different than coming out of a vending machine. So they're going to have some work to kind of rebuild. Are these, special bakery items, or did they just come out of a bag?
What are some of the things that a small business can do in terms of branding? Usually, a small business doesn't have resources, or they're not throwing as big a budget towards branding. what do you see missing in the small business area, and what should they be focusing on?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And especially if your definition or your interpretation of the word branding, means my sales and marketing budget. Well, I don't have a big branding budget. Well, if that means I don't have a big advertising budget, then back up and say, well, I don't mean marketing. No, I don't mean your ad budget. I mean your branding budget. So you have a budget to get in a room for 3 days with your key constituents, your internal, your external customers you lost, whatever, and say, let's get back to basics. How can we connect with you better? Are we calling you by name? Are we giving you that personal service? And then second, are we being honest with you? I'm not going to call them out by name, but I'm working with a contractor right now. Oh, I'm going to be there on Tuesday. They were not there on Tuesday. Oh, well, I'll have the general manager call you. I've never gotten a call. Okay, just be honest. So as a small business, you could have the advantage because you could get down to that honesty. And then look at the E in Chem and say, can I make it easier? What could I break down? And as a small business, maybe you can be a lot easier and more accessible than the big companies could. And then lastly, can I motivate you? Let's look at my pricing, or let's look at my contract terms, or let's look at the return policy, whatever the case might be. Can I motivate you to work with me more? And to tell people, I think small businesses, and I've been there, I've been a small business, a small consulting firm, and you don't want to let one client know you're working with the other clients because then they're going to be jealous, or you don't want them to know, oh my gosh, you're 85% of my business. It's like, whoa, that makes me a little nervous. But I think a small business needs to be upfront with that and say, can I serve you in a new or better way? And especially coming out of a business, I don't know if everybody thinks this is a crisis, but it's certainly a jolt to the business thinking. And I would go back to the basics. And if you're waiting for your PPP money and say, what am I going to do with, paying people, and what am I going to do with these people? I would say, let's go back to these chem basics to figure out that chemistry with our customers.
That's a great starting point. I want to talk a little bit more about dealing with a crisis. I read that you were once asked on Fox Business News which industries and companies were branding best in a weak economy. That was back, I think, during the financial crisis. What did you see then, and where are we today?
Yeah, well, and I think if I can roll that tape back the decade since, but I mean, I really said then that there were two examples in the energy field. There was Chevron and there was ExxonMobil. And ExxonMobil would run these little advertorials that were very policy driven. We have to think about oil and gas differently, and the drilling and the mining and all that kind of stuff. Where Chevron was saying, here's how to save money, here's how to save gas, here's how to clean your engine, come to our stations, we're cleaner, we're better, we're more convenient, giving you some real practical ways. And so I think if we could learn a lesson from that, whatever sector you're in right now, but if you're in the financial sector, a lot of people are looking to you for financial help. If you're in the business services, a lot of people are saying, what better service could you provide me? But are you going to be policy driven, or are you going to be practical driven? And again, the answer comes from the customer. I was hearing somebody talk about the other day, I don't need anybody to talk about the financial policy, the monetary policy, and the basis points and all this kind of stuff. I want to know, can I refinance my mortgage? Can I skip a month on my car payment? How is this all going to work? So I think, responding to a crisis, whatever business you're in right now, take a look at that very practical customer-oriented side.
It sounds so simple, but not always easy to execute. I mean,
not always easy.
Even when you were talking us through taking 3 days to do some brainstorming as a company, I felt like that's a great exercise. You can really go through CHEM, and prioritize what's important for your business. How should you be communicating? What can you do better? What can you do differently? But then the next step is action. Like, how are you implementing things differently, right? Is that the second half?
Completely. And I smile when you're describing that because you say, oh, it's so easy, 3 days. But I can't tell you how many clients have said, there's no way I can get my team away from the office for 3 days. Well, they've been away for 3 months now. So, let's rethink that 3-day thing. But I also have always come to the end of that. And somebody says, we've done more in the last 3 days to think about our customer, to think about our brand than we have in the last 3 years because we never stop, to really kind of retool. But yes, the action step is the next step. I think about this time last year, I was working with a group and, there were 12 of us in the hotel conference room. It's the typical meeting. We've wallpapered the walls with white flip chart paper, and we've really thought about their brand in a new and different way. They've had lightning bolt moments. Wow, this is really terrific. And it's like, now we have to go back Monday morning. We have to get back to our jobs. We have to go to all the same meetings we went to before. How are we going to be different? So the last part of the workshop, for me anyway, is always the actionable stuff. I mean, like really, really, what could we do? This is not a philosophical exercise. So when we go back, we're going to have a conference call with 3 of our best customers. Or we're all going to get a plane ticket and we're going to fly out and we're going to meet 7 of our biggest customers, or we're going to go to the focus group instead of wait for the transcript or the report. We're going to go live, something that says we're going to make some kind of first step. Otherwise, it has been a philosophical, and everybody says it felt good and the food was good and it was great to be with everybody, but nothing will come out of it.
How does a financial crisis or a pandemic, because these are seismic shift events, how should that shape one's branding or be an impetus to change one's brand or message?
In some cases, you simply have no choice. So I think about the healthcare field right now, and look, this is all live. It's in real time. So where it ends up, I don't want to try to prognosticate. But in other words, if I can't go to the doctor right now, literally cannot go, telemedicine has come into its own. Telemedicine has been around for 10 years or more. But now it is like, hey, this is the way it's going to be done. Or even go back further in the chain in R&D. People say, well, I can't do clinical trials because I have no access to the hospitals and, people won't come to the office for something that's not COVID related, or they're scared to come to the hospital because they'll get infected. So how are you going to do a clinical trial for the next generation of drugs? So we've had whole companies say, well, then a new and better way to do it is what's called a decentralized trial, and that they don't have to come down to the medical center. And we'll recruit them via social media. I work with a great client called 83 Bar. They're doing this kind of virtual patient recruitment, patient activation and engagement. So it's all a chance for these people with new and better ideas to say, now it's not a luxury anymore. Now this is the way it's going to be done.
For a company and a brand not to make an adjustment at a time like this, is there a risk of appearing insensitive or not reacting because it is such a global event for everyone?
And again, I go back to what I said on Fox News probably in 2009, and that is you can be quiet right now if you think that's best. There's a lot of messages right now that say, oh, we're all in this together and we're your brand and we'll be there when you need us. And a lot of the consumers are giving feedback. It's like, no, we're not in it together. You're my ketchup. We're not in this together. You're useful to me, but I don't feel an emotional bond with this brand. Now, on the other hand, you could say, if I just be quiet for a little bit and almost a stay-at-home strategy for the branding team, and say, let's work on some other components. Let's work on that other brand experience side of things so that when you come back, maybe there'll be something different that's actionable, that will show the customer they are really meaningful to you. Not a message, but an action.
Well, I'm hearing the importance of the C, your connect and maintaining communication with your customers. And you have to be listening. You need to listen to hear what your customers are feeling and what they're saying so that you can react appropriately.
Listening is hard. Listening requires, attention. Like, are you looking at me right now? And then it requires good questions. Tell me more about that. I mean, somebody asked me what was my favorite question, and it's, huh? What did you mean by that? Because it's like, oh yeah, I know what you mean. No, you don't know what I mean. Let me tell you what I mean. And I'm saying this like I'm some great listening expert, which my wife might disagree. My kids might disagree.
My wife definitely disagreed in my case.
Yeah, but clients say, "Oh, you're a great listener." Okay, I'll work on the clients and then I'll work on my family. All kidding aside, it's like, so yeah, that listening, that connecting is hard. But when you show an intention, and going back to what can businesses do, what can brands, big and small, do, work on your listening channels. If you perfected your message channels, your media channels, have you perfected your listening channels? How many websites do you go to that say, oh, we're listening. We want to hear from you. Chat with us now. And I hit that chat button and I wait 15 minutes. It's like, well, your opinion is very important to us. Well, apparently it's not that important. So, let's really dial in that listening part, especially now.
Yeah, that's where social media gets very interesting. Those platforms allow companies to listen. I think too often they're not listening. They're just using social media to blast out their own messaging. But the potential to allow your customers to respond and engage with you, that is powerful.
Big time. I always thought there was a great job at a lot of companies, and I worked with some people at ad agencies who did this. They were like social media, monitoring, listening, curating, and I thought, what a terrific job. Now the key is to believe it. It's like, oh, well, those are just the loud people. Those are just the complainers. Those are things that, they're outliers. No, you gotta take all of it in and say, if they're willing to write it out, this is like the comments or the reviews on Yelp, the reviews on Amazon. Hey, you got to take it all of its feedback, and let's process it.
Mark, I like to ask all the Inspired Money guests, how do you define success?
I think over time that has changed. I thought success used to be, how much are we growing, or we call it this hockey stick growth chart. But I think success for me has been the relationships over time. That if I still have a contact database, a Rolodex of even a dozen, really good people who say you're a trusted advisor to me, and they are to me and I am to them. That kind of relationship has been a very big success to me. And if you can look back and say, I made an impact, positive impact, then that would be success.
And with your Rolodex, how much do you measure the quality over quantity?
Well, it's for me anyway, and I can only speak from my own experience. It's quality for me. There's a lot of people who want to build big mailing lists, and I respect that. They want to do big outreach, and if I can get a 1% response, that'd be great. But I always felt like, no, especially we're kind of talking about crisis mode here. If I could put those two together, you say, who do I have on my speed dial that if I need something, somebody, some ideas, or if I need business, like, hey, I'm drowning over here, I wonder if X person, has a job. I would rather have the quality. And again, I can think of a couple of dozen. It's that tight. You say, I've worked with these people. They trust me. I trust them. And we could get it on, I
love that. I've heard it said that it's like, how many of your friends can you call when you're driving down the highway and you got a flat tire and you need somebody to pick you up. How many of those have you got?
Yeah. And they may go in compartments. Who could I call to fix a flat tire versus, I just had, some meeting canceled and I'm already stuck in Florida. Who could I call? And I always felt like, again, and remember when we used to travel? But it's like...
It feels like ages ago.
That's right. Yeah. But when I was on a plane, but I always felt like, look, as long as I'm here in Minneapolis or San Diego or Seattle, who do I know here? And as I've traveled around, it's like I've gone to Mumbai and I've gone to Shanghai and I've gone to Dubai. It's like, who do I know here? And now that's when quantity can help, because you can go on your LinkedIn and say, I've never even talked to this person, but I bet as long as I'm here, we could have a meeting. And that's kind of fun. But I think the quality of the people over time is much better.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Mark. Thanks for spending time with us today, enlightening us on branding and the importance of brand. Can you tell the Inspired Money listener where they can find out more about you, find your many books, and follow you?
Yeah. Well, I do have the author page on Amazon, so Mark Stinson. But my website is www.mark-stinson, STINSON.com. And all the books and a lot of other interviews and resources are on the website. Fantastic.
I'll get that all in the show notes. And Mark, thank you so much.
Andy, great being with you. Thanks for the great interview.
So what was your favorite Inspired Money moment? Throughout this conversation, Mark kept saying the word workshop. My takeaway is that you've got to make time for branding. Host a study group. Ask your friends or customers to help you find the words for your unique value proposition. If you're a company, talk amongst your employees. Poll your customers to help guide your brand and message. And then you've got to take a step back and listen and then execute. Do you have your Inspired Money sticker yet? It looks really great on a laptop. Take a screenshot or photo of the podcast, share it on social media and tag me. That's inspiredmoney.fm on Instagram. Or on Twitter, I'm RunnyMeadCap. That's RUNNYMEDECAP. That's short for Runnymede Capital. Let's connect on social media. I'll message you for your address and mail you a sticker. Inspired Money is edited by Christopher Wright of Wright Media. Thank you so much for joining me. If you haven't yet subscribed, I hope that you'll do it now so that you won't miss next week's show. I'll see you then. The music you're listening to right now and all other music on today's show is by the amazing Jim Kimo West. Have an inspired week and do something that scares you, because that's where the magic happens.